Well, I definitely need a drink of water after that long gospel message. It is one of the longest gospel stories. Now, I shared with you last Sunday, if you were here, that I am just celebrating 3 years as your pastor. And many of you know that our lectionary readings each week are on a 3-year cycle. So I have been waiting 3 years for this gospel story to come up, because it is one of my favorite gospel stories, and I'm so excited to teach it to you this morning. Many artists, of course, have also been inspired by this story. There are great works of art of Jesus with the woman at the well that are hanging in art museums all over the world. Jesus had lots of conversations with people in the Gospels. But his longest conversation with anyone is with the Samaritan woman at the well. And I think that is quite significant. In fact, when I was reflecting on it each day this week, I actually started to get quite emotional, because I came to realize that Jesus spent the most time with someone who had been rejected by society and by religion. I've shared with you before that women in Jesus' day were looked down upon. They were considered inferior. They were property of men. And I've shared with you before that Samaritans were considered inferior. They were considered unclean people. In fact, good Jewish people were supposed to avoid any interactions with Samaritans. Even when traveling, Jews were told to travel around Samaria, but never through it, like Jesus does in today's gospel. And then, of course, we hear that this woman has been married 5 times, and that the man she's living with now is not her husband. Quite scandalous. Now, in Jesus' day, women could not divorce their husbands. Only husbands could divorce their wives. So this woman has been rejected 5 times. And though it doesn't say so in today's gospel, I think she's been rejected by the people in her town. Because you would think that most of the town's women would go to the well early in the morning before things got too hot. But the Samaritan woman goes to the well at noon, the hottest part of the day when probably nobody would be around. And it's why she's so shocked to see Jesus there. So this woman is someone who's been rejected because of her gender, because of her ethnicity, because of her religion, and because of her status in society. And she is so surprised that Jesus, a good, upstanding Jew, would talk to her or even acknowledge her. And what does Jesus say to her? Does Jesus scold her? Does Jesus judge her? Does Jesus say, "You need to change your ways, woman"? Does he call her a sinner? Does he say to her that you're broken and that you're not worthy? No. He does just the opposite. He tells her her worth. And that breaks her free of all of the limitations that have been put upon her. Jesus tells her something extraordinary. He said, there is a gift from God, living water that you can have right now. Jesus came to tell that to the Samaritan woman, and he comes to tell that to us. No matter what you've been through in life, no matter what you've done in life, Jesus is saying, there's this gift from God, this living water, and it's available to you right now. Such a beautiful story. Now, did this story actually happen? Was there really a Samaritan woman at the well? Well, this story is only told to us in John's Gospel. And as we heard from Bishop John Shelby Spong in our words of integration this morning, The characters in John's gospel are literary creations of its author or authors. Many of you know that I got to meet Bishop Spong last year at a UCC church in Massachusetts. He is 85 years old right now. He's devoted his entire life to studying Scripture, and he's probably the most well-known biblical scholar alive today. And as we heard in our words of integration, Bishop Spong says the characters in the pages of this book were never intended to be understood as actual people who lived in history. That these stories are just symbolic stories. They're not literal stories. And as he said, the author of John's Gospel seems to mock people who take things literally. Last Sunday's gospel reading from the lectionary was the story of Nicodemus. We didn't read it because we had Standing Rock Sunday. But the story of Nicodemus is Jesus tells him you need to be born again. And Nicodemus, who takes things literally, says, how can I go back in my mother's womb? And then in today's gospel story, Jesus says to the woman at the well, I'm going to give you living water. And she says, man, you don't even have a bucket. So the author of John's Gospel is really trying to make the point, don't take the Bible literally. These stories aren't, this isn't a history book. This is a symbolic book. Now, Bishop Spong says this, and I want to make it clear. Bishop Spong says, I love the Bible. It feeds me. It's my favorite book. Just because the stories aren't true doesn't mean that they don't speak to truth. And this story of the woman at the well is a symbolic story that teaches us truth. So what is the symbolism and truth of this story? Well, on the surface level, it seems to be about literal thirst and literal water. But of course, Jesus is talking about metaphysical thirst and metaphysical water. Jesus says if you drink of literal water, you're going to keep being thirsty. But if you drink each day from this spiritual water, you'll never be thirsty. And where is the water? Well, Jesus said it in today's gospel. He said, there is an eternal spring gushing up within you. That's where the water is. Most of us try to quench our thirst with things outside of us. We think, if I get that house or that car, success, money, material things, then my thirst will be quenched. God, I'm just asking for this, and then I'll never ask for anything else. Okay? And then, of course, we get those outside things, and they don't quench our thirst. We want more. Jesus is saying, don't seek those outer things. Your thirst can only be quenched by this internal and eternal spring of water that's gushing up within you. And that this gift from God is in everyone. You don't have to be a certain gender. You don't have to be a certain ethnicity. And you don't have to be a certain religion. This water isn't just for Christians. Jesus wasn't a Christian. He says to the woman, you don't have to worship at the temple. Because she says, well, I'm a Samaritan. I'm not allowed to worship in the Jewish temple. He said, you don't have to worship there. He says, you worship in spirit. God is spirit. And true worshipers are people who worship in spirit, not in a particular temple or church or religion. And so the message here is that this gift has been given to you. You don't have to do anything to earn it. You already have it. And so the season of Lent is a time for you to go to the well, to go deep within yourself, to get that living water, to spend time alone with God in conversation, like what happens in today's gospel story. and to get that eternal and internal spring. Now, the word Lent comes from an Anglo-Saxon word that means spring. And most of us, of course, think of the season of spring, which is true. But this gospel also gets us to think about that other spring, that spring of water, that fountain of living water within us. And that is what we are to do each day during the Lenten season, is to spend time alone at the well. And to remind ourselves that we need to let go of the things that are no longer quenching our thirst, and to go and get that water, that living water of God that will quench our thirst. Jesus says to the woman at the well, "Oh, if you only knew this gift of God that is within you." And most of us don't. Most of us don't know it. We think this is too good to be true. People say, "Oh, Pastor Sal, if you knew what my life was like, if you knew the things that I did, if you knew, there's no way God could be in me. It's not possible." And Jesus is saying to the woman who's been rejected, this is in you. And he's saying to us, this is within you. This gift is within you. Bishop Spong reminds us in our words of integration this morning, a paradigm shift has to take place within us. And what better time for you to make that shift than during the season of Lent? Please stop looking at your faith, at Christianity, as just about recognizing the divinity of Jesus. The shift has to be that our faith, our reason for being here, is to recognize our divinity. That's what Jesus came to teach. He didn't want us to worship him. He wanted us to do as he did. Said, "Everything that I've done, you can do." And then he added, "These things and greater." Jesus knew that gift was within him, and he's telling us it is within us. And so, in the remainder of this season of Lent, I invite you to find time each day to go to the well, to spend time alone with God, to go deep within that well to that internal and eternal spring of living water, and to be still and know that I am God. Namaste.